As Naveen Dhaliwal reports, her family says it shows a system that failed her, and we do need to warn you that this video may be difficult to watch.
It's a knock at the door that quickly escalates. Newly released body camera video by the New Jersey Attorney General's office shows New Brunswick police responding to the Nielsen Street apartment of Deborah Terrell after 911 calls of her disturbing other residents.
And she keeps going in and out of her apartment with like a huge knife.
When officers arrived early August 8th, Terrell was behind her apartment door. At first, she opens the door, then slams it shut after numerous attempts by officers to engage with her.
Hey, Deborah, you mind come in?
A knife appears under the bottom of the door, Terrell sliding it back and forth. Terrell is seen opening the door with a knife in her hand. An officer on the right deploys a taser. The officer on the left, pepper spray. Then she walks out into the hallway. That's where we freeze the video. The Attorney General says 2 shots were fired at Terrell, killing her.
It was horrifying. It was horrifying.
Terrell's family, who watched the video, says it was like reliving her final moments.
This is all still surreal. Like, we still don't believe it happened.
They tell us the 68-year-old had long battled schizophrenia, and the officer should have been better trained to deal with mental health situations.
Contact the health practitioner. Find out if she's on meds, or find out what situation she's dealing with before they address her personally.
The Attorney General's office is investigating the shooting as a matter of policy. For the family, this video wasn't just evidence, a part of an investigation. It was a moment their loved one's life ended. And now they say they want to make sure it doesn't happen again.
We got a long road ahead of us. We're just still, kind of like in fight mode.
In New Brunswick, Naveen Dhaliwal, CBS News, New York.
Imagine a 68-year-old grandmother living quietly inside her senior citizen apartment, battling the demons of mental illness and simply trying to exist in peace, until one night the very people called to protect her arrived with flashing lights and guns drawn, and within minutes, her life was cut short in a hail of bullets. A death so shocking and controversial, it sent ripples of anger and fear across New Jersey, and left an entire community asking the same haunting question. How did a call for help end with an elderly woman bleeding to death in her own hallway? And what does this say about the system we all trust to keep us safe? Welcome to the Untold Crime Chronicles. May God bless you and keep you safe as you watch this story. Your support means everything to us. So please take a moment to subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment, because every single action you take helps this video reach more people who need to hear the truth. Now let us return to the story. Deborah Terrell was not just a name in a police report. She was a 68-year-old woman born and raised in New Jersey who had spent her life in the same community where she was later killed. She lived in a senior citizen housing complex on Nielsen Street, a place meant to provide safety and stability for the elderly. But behind her apartment door, she lived with a heavy burden for decades. Deborah had battled schizophrenia, a mental health condition that made her both vulnerable and misunderstood. Sometimes her neighbors would hear her talking to herself or moving around restlessly. Sometimes she would act out in ways that made people uncomfortable, but those who knew her closely said she was not a threat. She was a human being, struggling with an illness that never gave her rest. She survived on disability benefits and lived modestly with limited income, rarely leaving her apartment except to pick up groceries or attend medical appointments. Neighbors described her as a woman who carried sadness in her eyes, but who also had moments of warmth when she was stable. She could be kind, polite, even cheerful, but when her condition worsened, she became isolated, withdrawn, pacing the halls or muttering at shadows. She had no criminal history. She had no pattern of violence. She was simply an elderly woman trying to survive inside a system that provided medication, but little in the way of human compassion. In the final years of her life, she relied almost completely on public housing staff and state programs, but even those were stretched thin. Deborah's story was not one of crime or danger. It was a story of sickness, survival, and society's failure to provide adequate care for its most vulnerable. Yet all of that would be overshadowed by one tragic night when her private struggles exploded into a public disaster. On the night of August 8, 2025, the quiet walls of the senior citizen building on Nielsen Street echoed with unease. Multiple residents called 911, reporting that their elderly neighbor, Deborah Terrell, was behaving erratically. They said she was going in and out of her apartment clutching a large kitchen knife, muttering to herself and disturbing the peace for those neighbors. It was frightening not because she had ever attacked anyone before, but because no one knew what she might do in her fragile state within minutes. Uniformed New Brunswick police officers arrived at the building, lights flashing, radios crackling. The officers made their way down the narrow hallways to the third floor where Deborah lived. They knocked on her door firmly, announcing their presence. She cracked it open, and for a brief moment words were exchanged. But then, without explanation, she closed the door again. The officers noticed movement beneath the crack of the door, and then, to their alarm, the blade of a knife began to slide back and forth under it, like a warning sign. They ordered her to drop it, but she did not respond. Minutes dragged by tension mounting as more officers gathered, debating what to do. Body cameras captured the moment when she suddenly emerged into the hallway, holding the knife close to her chest, her face marked by fear and confusion. The officers shouted commands. "Drop the knife! Drop the knife!" over and over, their voices rising. But Deborah did not comply. Perhaps she could not understand. In her mental state, one officer fired a taser. Its wires shot forward, but the probes missed her body. Another officer discharged pepper spray, filling the hallway with burning mist. But Deborah still clutched the knife, her steps small but steady. The officers began to back up. Guns drawn, their shouts now urgent in the chaos. 2 officers opened fire. 2 bullets struck her body, and in seconds her frail frame collapsed onto the hallway floor. She gasped as blood stained the tiles, and the knife slipped from her weakening grip. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. Deborah Terrell, the 68-year-old grandmother who had spent years fighting schizophrenia, lay dying just outside the door of her own apartment. A call for help had turned into a death sentence, and within minutes, her life was gone. In the days that followed Deborah Terrell's death, New Brunswick was left reeling, and questions erupted across the city. How could a 68-year-old woman in a senior housing building end up dead at the hands of police? The New Jersey Office of Public Integrity and Accountability immediately took control of the investigation, as required in every case where an officer discharges a weapon resulting in death. Body camera footage was quickly secured, and officials promised transparency to a community already filled with anger. When the footage was released, it revealed step by step what had unfolded: the tense knocking at her door, the sight of the knife blade moving under the threshold, the moment Deborah stepped into the hallway clutching the knife, and the desperate shouts from officers telling her to drop it. It also showed that before the fatal gunshots, officers had attempted less lethal measures, one firing a taser that failed to connect, and another releasing pepper spray that seemed to have no effect. Despite those efforts, the images of an elderly woman collapsing after being shot proved devastating to watch and sparked heated debate. Many residents argued that the video showed officers escalating rather than calming the situation, while law enforcement officials claimed they had no choice but to act to protect themselves and others. As the investigation progressed, interviews were conducted with neighbors who described Deborah as a troubled but non-violent woman who needed psychiatric help, not armed confrontation. Her family members spoke publicly about her long struggle with schizophrenia, demanding to know why trained mental health professionals had not been called to the scene. Experts in crisis intervention also weighed in, pointing out that the incident highlighted a statewide failure to establish proper crisis response units designed to handle exactly this type of situation. Every frame of the body cam video was analyzed, frame by frame, every decision by each officer placed under scrutiny. Yet the central question remained hauntingly unanswered. Could Deborah's death have been prevented if the system had treated her as a patient instead of as a threat? As the investigation unfolded, attention quickly shifted toward legal accountability and the role of the courts. The New Jersey Attorney General's office announced that the case would be reviewed by the Office of Public Integrity and Accountability to determine whether the officers involved had violated the law. Families and activists demanded criminal charges, arguing that two trained officers should never have resorted to deadly force against a 68-year-old grandmother with known mental health struggles.
It was horrifying. It was horrifying.
Terrell's family, who watched the video, says it was like reliving her final moments.
This is all still surreal. We still don't believe it happened.
Civil rights attorneys representing Deborah Terrell's family began preparing a lawsuit against the city of New Brunswick and its police department, alleging negligence, excessive force, and failure to provide reasonable accommodations for her psychiatric condition. During the review process, prosecutors examined body camera evidence, police training manuals, and the sequence of commands given in the moments before the shooting. The defense for the officers argued that their actions fell within policy, that they had tried both a taser and pepper spray, and only fired when Deborah continued to hold the knife and pose what they believed was a direct threat to life. The courts, however, have not yet issued criminal indictments, leaving the family caught in a limbo of waiting and frustration. The civil case, meanwhile, is still being shaped and will likely argue that New Jersey's failure to implement mental health crisis teams directly contributed to Deborah's unnecessary death. Lawmakers have begun to cite her case in debates about police reform, pointing to it as proof of why specialized mental health responders must be dispatched instead of armed officers in psychiatric emergencies. As of now, the case remains under review. No officers have been formally charged. Public hearings are expected, and the Terrell family continues to push both for justice in court and for reforms that would ensure no other vulnerable senior suffers the same fate. The aftermath of Deborah Terrell's death did not end with her funeral. It became a rallying cry across New Jersey, and beyond. Neighbors who had once dismissed her as just another troubled tenant suddenly realized the weight of what had been lost. An elderly woman who needed compassion had instead faced the barrels of guns. Community leaders organized vigils outside the senior housing complex, candles lined the sidewalks, prayers were whispered, and signs demanding justice were lifted. High activists stood with her family, reminding the public that Deborah was not a criminal.
New tonight, a vigil held in New Jersey for the victim of a police-involved shooting. The vigil was held in New Brunswick, outside the building where Deborah Terrell was killed earlier this month. Her family says the 68-year-old struggled with mental illness. Police responded to her building after getting a call. She was holding a knife and pacing in the hallway. Officers used pepper spray and a taser during the struggle in the hallway before a shot was fired, killing her.
First heard it and what happened, I was literally sick to my stomach. But now is the time to heal.
We know that you hurt too, even if you didn't know her, even if you never met her. Just the fact that how things happen hurt you.
The New Jersey Attorney General's office is investigating, but findings could take weeks or even months.
She was a grandmother, a woman who had lived her entire life in that city and who deserved dignity. In her final years, mental health advocates seized on the tragedy as undeniable evidence of a broken system. They pointed out that New Jersey had long promised to create mobile crisis units staffed by trained mental health professionals. Yet those promises had remained largely unfunded and unfulfilled. And so when the call for help came, it was police who arrived with weapons, not clinicians with treatment plans. Lawmakers were forced to respond, some pledging new legislation, others deflecting blame. But everywhere, people began asking the same question: how many more vulnerable lives would be lost before real reform happened for the Terrell family? The pain was deeper than policy. It was personal. They had watched their loved one's struggle ignored for decades and then end in blood and shock on a hallway floor. They vowed to fight not only for justice in her name, but to ensure that Deborah's story would become a lesson for every community in America, the lesson that elderly lives matter, that mental illness does not equal criminality, and that compassion, not fear, must guide crisis response. The awareness sparked by her death continues to spread, urging people to rethink how we handle those most in need. This is the Untold Crime Chronicles, bringing light to stories that many would rather keep in the dark. The death of Deborah Terrell is not just a headline. It is a warning. It is a reminder that behind every police report, there is a human life, a family shattered, and a community forever changed. If you believe these stories matter, if you want to stand with us as we continue to expose the truth and demand accountability, then please take a moment to support this channel. Your voice, your comments, and your subscription mean more than you realize. Together, we can make sure these tragedies are not forgotten. We can give a platform to the voiceless and push for the changes that might save the next life. If you are new here, please subscribe to the Untold Crime Chronicles. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for listening, and may God bless and keep every one of us safe.